The girl was only 12 years old, though she carried herself with a maturity beyond her years. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and innocence, always observing the world with wonder and kindness. She had a gentle voice, soft as a whispering breeze, and a heart that could not bear the slightest cruelty. Every morning she would wake before sunrise, careful not to disturb anyone, and begin her chores quietly. She tended to the small garden behind their modest home, watered the flowers and fed the chickens, all the while humming softly, imagining a day when life would be kinder to her. Her hair, long and glossy, fell over her shoulders like a cascade of sunlight, framing her delicate face. Though she wore simple clothes, often patched and worn, her spirit shone brighter than any finery. Her stepmother, by contrast, was a woman of ambition and greed. She had borne no love for the girl since the day she arrived in the household and instead showered all affection on her own daughters. These stepsisters were pampered, allowed to rest while the girl labored, and given sweets while the girl nibbled on the crusts left behind. Every minor mistake, whether dropping a bucket of water or letting a plant wither, was blamed on her. The stepmother's sharp tongue would lash without mercy, often accompanied by cruel looks that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Despite this, the girl never responded with anger. She bowed her head, accepted the blame quietly, and carried on, silently wishing for a world where fairness existed. In the small moments of her day, she allowed herself to dream. As she swept the floors, she imagined a life where she could run freely through the fields, laughing without fear of reprimand. When she fed the chickens, she pictured herself traveling to distant lands, meeting kind people who would love and respect her for who she truly was. She often whispered these wishes into the wind, hoping someone, somewhere, might hear them. She longed for the warmth of a true family, for someone to hold her hand and tell her that she was enough. These dreams, however, were always interrupted by the harsh reality of her stepmother's cruelty. Yet even in the shadow of mistreatment, her gentle nature remained unwavering. She helped her siblings when they stumbled, wiped the tears of younger children in the village, and even offered the tiniest morsels of food to the animals in need. Every act of kindness was like a small flame, burning quietly but fiercely, illuminating her goodness. In stark contrast, her stepmother's heart was hardened by greed and selfishness. She coveted wealth, appearance, and power, and her cruelty toward the girl seemed to grow with each passing day. The difference between them could not have been more pronounced. One a beacon of purity and hope, the other a figure of jealousy and oppression. Even with all the hardships, the girl's spirit remained unbroken. She woke each morning with the same gentle smile, carried out her duties with care, and clung to her dreams of freedom and love. Little did she know, the challenges she faced were preparing her for a fate that would soon change not only her life but the entire village. In these quiet, ordinary days before betrayal, the girl's innocence shone brightly, a light that no cruelty could ever extinguish. The stepmother's hatred for the girl had grown steadily over the years, fueled by envy, fear, and ambition. Every smile the girl offered, every act of kindness she performed, only seemed to deepen the stepmother's resentment. She envied the girl's natural beauty, her pure heart, and the way the villagers admired her. Unlike her own daughters, who were pampered and coddled, the girl's goodness shone without effort, attracting attention and respect. This constant reminder of her own shortcomings gnawed at the stepmother's pride. She feared that the girl's innocence and virtue would overshadow her own ambitions, that one day, the villagers would favor the girl over her family entirely. Each gentle word, each small achievement of the girl became a source of irritation, planting seeds of malice in the stepmother's heart. Over time, these feelings developed into a dangerous obsession. The stepmother began to plot quietly, concealing her intentions behind smiles and ordinary conversations. She whispered secretly to her daughters, instructing them to make the girl's life harder, to ensure she was always tired, hungry, and distracted. She would often be seen pacing late at night, muttering under her breath, or disappearing into rooms with doors closed, speaking to unknown visitors or writing secret letters. Sometimes, the girl caught glimpses of these furtive actions, a shadow passing behind a curtain, a suspicious rustle of papers, or the faintest sound of a whispered conversation. Though she did not fully understand, a chilling sense of unease settled in her chest. Something was wrong, she could feel it, though the villagers carried on unaware, oblivious to the danger lurking within the household. The stepmother's plan began to take shape. She would rid herself of the girl entirely, removing the obstacle to her ambitions and silencing the threat to her family's image. The plan was cruel but clever. She would sell the girl to strangers, merchants, or even those who dealt in darker trades. It was a decision born of greed, envy, and fear of being outshone. The stepmother justified her actions in her mind, claiming that she was securing her daughter's future and maintaining her own control. She did not consider the girl's innocence, dreams, or life. To her, the girl was a tool to be discarded once she had served her purpose. Every detail was planned meticulously: the timing, the route, and the people involved. She even made preparations to appear as though the girl had simply wandered away, leaving no trace of suspicion toward her own household. Meanwhile, the girl, ever perceptive despite her youth, felt the undercurrent of malice. She noticed the subtle changes in her stepmother's behavior, the sharp glances, hushed conversations, and sudden silences when she entered the room. Her instincts whispered that something terrible was about to happen, though she could not put her finger on what it might be. She observed the villagers too, and realized they were blissfully unaware, trusting in appearances and the stepmother's false charm. Fear mingled with confusion in her heart, and yet she also felt a spark of determination. Even in the face of growing danger, she resolved to stay vigilant, hoping that somehow she might escape the stepmother's cruel plans. The stage was set for betrayal. The girl's innocence, her dreams, and her gentle spirit were now shadowed by the stepmother's dark intentions. The seeds of envy had grown into a plot that threatened to uproot her entire life. And though the villagers remained oblivious, the girl's intuition whispered the truth. Her world was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine, and only her courage and wits could guide her through the coming storm. That morning began like any other for the girl. She awoke before the first light of dawn, her small body stiff from sleep yet eager to begin the day's chores. The dew still clung to the grass outside, sparkling faintly under the soft light of the rising sun. Birds chirped in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and flowers. She stretched, rubbed the sleep from her eyes, and quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake her stepmother or stepsisters. She had learned long ago that silence was her shield against their anger, and she moved through the house like a shadow, performing her morning tasks with precision. She swept the floors, arranged the firewood, and filled the water jugs, all while humming a soft tune she had learned from the village elders. At that moment she felt no suspicion, no premonition, only the simple rhythm of life she had known for years. Her stepmother appeared in the doorway, smiling with a warmth that seemed genuine but was, in truth, a mask hiding her sinister intent. "Child," she said, voice sweet, "run an errand for me today. Take this basket to the market and deliver it to a merchant who has requested it. Be swift and careful." The girl, trusting and obedient, took the basket without hesitation. She had carried baskets for her family countless times and knew the way to the market well. Her stepmother handed her a small coin as if rewarding her diligence, though it was only meant to reinforce her trust. The girl tucked the coin into her pocket, unaware that it was a lure, a tool to keep her from questioning the plan that was being set in motion. As she walked along the familiar path toward the market, she noticed subtle signs that something was different. The birds were unusually quiet in the trees, and a strange chill hung in the morning air. A sense of unease crept into her chest, but she dismissed it, blaming it on the early hour or her imagination. She imagined herself returning with the basket and earning her stepmother's approval, perhaps even a rare smile, and that thought brought a small flutter of happiness. She did not yet understand that her stepmother's smile had been the first step in a carefully orchestrated betrayal. When she arrived at the designated meeting spot, a group of strangers stood waiting. They were dressed plainly but carried an air of authority, speaking in low, deliberate tones. The girl hesitated, sensing that something was amiss, yet the coin in her pocket and her stepmother's instructions urged her forward. "Deliver the basket," she whispered to herself, gripping the handles tightly. She approached them, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey filled with fear and sorrow. The strangers smiled politely, yet there was a coldness behind their eyes, a calculation that made her stomach twist in confusion. It was then that the stepmother's deception became apparent. She had planned everything meticulously, instructing the strangers to appear helpful and kind, while ensuring that the girl would have no reason to suspect danger. As the girl handed over the basket, one of the strangers gently took her hand, guiding her to a waiting cart. Her protests were mild, barely audible, as confusion and fear began to take hold. "What is happening?" she thought, her heart racing. The realization struck her like a cold wind. She had been sold. The person she had trusted above all, her stepmother, had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring the world around her. The journey began, the cart rattling along the uneven road as the girl sat huddled, shivering from both the cold and the weight of her heartbreak. Her mind replayed the morning, the sweet smile, the gentle instructions, the coin, all lies carefully crafted to trap her. She felt abandoned, as if the ground beneath her had given way and left her floating in a world she no longer recognized. Every mile that carried her away from home felt like a wound opening wider in her chest. She could not comprehend how someone who shared her roof, who had sworn to care for her, could orchestrate such cruelty. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain she had ever known, leaving her trembling and silent. The strangers tried to soothe her with kind words, offering water and small comforts, but their efforts only heightened her sense of loss. She longed for her parents, for the familiar safety of her home, and most painfully, for the stepmother's love that had never truly existed. The girl curled into herself, clutching her knees, whispering prayers into the wind, and hoping that some force, divine or natural, would protect her from the fate that had been cruelly chosen. In that moment, the innocence of her childhood was shattered, replaced by a heavy awareness of the world's capacity for deceit and malice. By the time the cart reached the destination, the girl had begun to understand the scale of her stepmother's treachery. She was no longer merely a child completing daily chores. She had become a pawn in a game of greed and ambition. The emotional weight of the betrayal pressed down on her, but beneath the fear and heartbreak, a spark of resilience began to flicker. She realized that while she had been sold, she was not yet defeated. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet determination began to grow, a promise that one day she would reclaim her life and uncover the truths that had been hidden from her. The cart rattled over the uneven dirt road, the wheels creaking and groaning under the weight of its passengers. The girl clutched the edges tightly, her knuckles white with fear, and stared at the passing landscape. Fields she had never seen stretched to the horizon, dotted with unfamiliar trees and the occasional cluster of thatched huts. The village she had grown up in, with its familiar paths and friendly faces, slowly disappeared behind her, swallowed by distance and the early morning mist. The strangers who had taken her remained quiet, speaking only in low tones, their expressions unreadable. Their eyes occasionally darted to her, a mixture of curiosity and authority, as if she were both a burden and a treasure. Each glance made her stomach churn with anxiety, and she found herself shrinking further into herself, wishing for the safety of her own small room and the warmth of her mother's embrace, long gone but still remembered in the corners of her heart. The journey seemed endless. Every turn in the road revealed new challenges, streams that forced the cart to slow, hills that made the wheels groan under pressure, and thorny brush that scraped against the sides. The girl shivered, not just from the cold that had seeped through her thin clothes, but from the growing fear of the unknown. She had never been beyond the borders of her village, and now, everything was unfamiliar. Each face she glimpsed from the roadside seemed distant and strange, and even the birds and animals felt like silent witnesses to her helplessness. Yet, amidst the fear, she tried to understand the people who had brought her here. Why had her stepmother sold her? Who were these strangers and what did they want with a child like her? Questions tumbled through her mind, but answers were scarce, replaced only by an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. As the hours passed, she encountered the first signs of hardship. The cart stopped briefly to let the horses rest, and the strangers offered her a small piece of bread and a sip of water. It was kindness, faint and distant, but it did little to soothe the ache in her heart. She hesitated to eat, afraid that consuming even a morsel might somehow betray her discomfort or fear. The bread was hard, stale, and barely nourishing, yet she accepted it, knowing that refusal would only invite scrutiny. The water was cool and refreshing, and she drank it slowly, trying to calm the panic rising within her. Though the gestures were small, they reminded her that even in a world filled with deception, there were fleeting moments of humanity. The girl's mind wandered constantly. She replayed the betrayal, imagining what her stepmother had whispered to the strangers, how she had presented the sale as a necessary act, and how easily she had deceived everyone. The thought made her chest tighten, a bitter mixture of sadness and anger coursing through her. She longed for home, the familiar scent of her garden, the laughter of village children, the quiet presence of neighbors who had always regarded her with gentle eyes. She longed for justice, for a day when the wrongs inflicted upon her would be corrected, and her stepmother would face the consequences of her cruelty. These thoughts became a silent companion during the long hours, a way to maintain her sense of self amidst the turmoil. The landscape changed as they traveled further. Rolling hills gave way to dense forests, and the cart lurched along narrow paths carved from underbrush. The air grew cooler and shadows lengthened as the sun arced across the sky. She observed everything with a mix of fear and fascination, noticing the songs of birds unfamiliar to her ears, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, and the glint of sunlight on distant streams. She tried to memorize the path, hoping that if she ever escaped she might find her way back. Each moment was a lesson in survival, each mile a test of endurance. Despite her fear, there were small acts of kindness that left a mark. One stranger, perhaps noticing her shivering, offered her a coarse blanket. Another gave her a soft word of reassurance, telling her to rest and not be afraid. These fleeting gestures reminded her that even among strangers, empathy existed, though it was faint and rare. They did not erase the betrayal, nor did they lessen the pain of being sold by the one person she had trusted, but they were small beacons of hope in an otherwise bleak journey. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the girl curled into herself, whispering prayers under her breath. She asked for guidance, for protection, and for the courage to survive the trials ahead. In her heart, she vowed that she would not be broken by the cruelty of others. She would remember the kindness, however small, and carry it with her, a reminder that not all people were cruel. Her longing for home, for family, and for justice burned quietly, growing into a resolve that would one day shape her destiny. The journey to the unknown had begun, and though the path was fraught with fear and hardship, the girl's spirit, fragile yet unyielding, refused to surrender. As the girl traveled further from her village, the strangers guiding her led her into regions unfamiliar and mysterious. She soon realized that this journey was not just a physical one but a path into the hidden layers of the world, where knowledge and power existed beyond what ordinary eyes could perceive. In the quiet moments between travel and rest, she began to notice things others seemed oblivious to: small glimmers of light dancing in the shadows, the whisper of the wind that seemed to carry messages, and the faint hum of an energy she could not explain. At first, she feared these signs, unsure whether they were omens of danger or a strange form of protection, but over time she learned to listen. The world she had known, the simple village paths, familiar trees and known faces, was only a fragment of the truths that lay hidden beyond. In one dimly lit cabin where the strangers stopped for the night, she stumbled upon a hidden chest tucked beneath the floorboards. Its surface was covered in dust, and the lock had long been worn with age, as if no one had touched it for decades. Curiosity overtook her fear, and she carefully lifted the lid. Inside were objects of both wonder and mystery: small carved figurines, scrolls of worn paper with strange symbols, and a collection of gemstones that glimmered with a light unlike any she had seen before. As she held the scrolls in her hands, words seemed to rearrange themselves, forming pictures and knowledge that spoke directly to her heart. She realized she had stumbled upon a form of forbidden knowledge, secrets that few were meant to see. There were instructions for healing, for protection, and for understanding the natural and supernatural forces that governed the world. This discovery filled her with awe, a sense of destiny, and the knowledge that she was not helpless despite her current circumstances. In addition to these mystical discoveries, the girl uncovered truths about her stepmother that were hidden from the villagers and from her as a child. In quiet conversations she overheard or in documents she found tucked away among the strangers' belongings, she learned of past misdeeds, how the stepmother had exploited her family, manipulated neighbors, and deceived the village for years. Each revelation was like a small puzzle piece, slowly forming a picture of greed, cruelty, and ambition that stretched far beyond the simple act of selling the girl. She began to understand the depth of her stepmother's schemes and the lengths she would go to maintain power and control. With this knowledge came a new clarity: her stepmother's actions were not just personal betrayals, but part of a broader pattern of manipulation and harm. Throughout these discoveries, signs of guidance and protection were never far from the girl. On quiet nights, the wind would carry whispers, seemingly pointing her toward hidden objects or warning her of danger. Elders and spirits she encountered in dreams offered wisdom through cryptic visions, teaching her patience, courage, and the ability to see beyond the surface of events. Sometimes she would wake with new understanding of complex situations, or a sudden insight would appear as if from nowhere, helping her solve problems or avoid threats. These experiences strengthened her resolve, and she began to feel that she was not merely a passive victim of her circumstances but a participant in a larger plan that was unfolding around her. As she absorbed these hidden secrets, a sense of purpose began to crystallize within her. She realized that the knowledge she had gained could not remain unused. The treasures, scrolls, and insights were tools she could wield not only to protect herself but to reveal the truth and bring justice to those who had wronged her. In quiet moments, she imagined the day she would return to her village, armed with wisdom and evidence that would shock those who had doubted her and expose the cruelty of her stepmother. Each night, as she drifted to sleep, visions of her eventual return filled her mind: the expressions of awe and fear on the villagers' faces, the stepmother confronted by the weight of her own actions, and the girl standing tall and unafraid, the bearer of long-hidden truths. The hidden secrets became both shield and weapon, a source of strength that transformed her from a frightened, abandoned child into a figure of quiet power. Every discovery, every whispered lesson, every small act of courage along the journey contributed to her growing sense of agency. She understood that the world held both danger and wonder, cruelty and compassion, but above all, that knowledge was power. With each passing day, she prepared herself for the return that would not only reunite her with her home but also unveil the truths that had been buried in shadows for too long. The girl's heart, once heavy with fear and sorrow, now burned with determination, anticipation, and the promise of justice. As the days turned into weeks, the girl began to adapt to her new surroundings. What had initially felt like a prison became a place of learning, observation, and subtle growth. She watched carefully how the strangers conducted themselves, noting their routines, habits, and patterns. She learned to anticipate their actions, finding small ways to ease her workload or avoid unnecessary punishment. Her hands, once delicate from a life of simple chores, became nimble and strong, capable of handling tools, preparing meals, and performing tasks with precision. She absorbed knowledge from every opportunity, the way plants were identified and used for food or medicine, the signs in the sky that predicted weather, and the lessons whispered in hushed tones among the adults. Each skill she acquired was a small victory, a step toward self-reliance and empowerment. In addition to her practical education, the girl found solace and support in friendships she formed along the way. Among other captives or locals she encountered, she discovered allies who shared wisdom, advice, and small acts of kindness. One elderly woman taught her how to identify herbs and roots with healing properties, while a young boy showed her secret paths through the forest that offered safety and speed. These connections were invaluable, not only helping her survive physically but also reinforcing the belief that compassion and solidarity existed even in harsh circumstances. Through shared stories and quiet conversations, she began to understand the wider world, its dangers and its wonders. Each friendship was a bridge to resilience, a reminder that even in isolation she was never truly alone. The transformation within her was gradual but profound. She no longer approached life with the passive fear of a helpless child. Instead, she cultivated resilience, courage, and strategic thinking. Every obstacle became an opportunity to test herself, learning when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to use her knowledge to influence situations in her favor. Her mind sharpened like a blade, honed by necessity and the lessons she absorbed from those around her. She became adept at reading people, discerning intentions behind words and actions, and planning several steps ahead. Even her fears were tempered by understanding and preparation, turning vulnerability into a source of insight rather than weakness. As her strength grew, so did her sense of purpose. The girl realized that her journey had prepared her for something greater than mere survival. She reflected on the betrayal she had endured, the loss of her home, and the injustices committed by her stepmother. These memories, once a source of sorrow and despair, now fueled her determination. Quietly, she began to envision her eventual return to the village, imagining how she would confront those who had wronged her and reveal the truths she had uncovered. Every lesson learned, every skill acquired, and every friendship formed contributed to the careful preparation she undertook in her mind. Hints of her impending return became increasingly clear in her daily actions. She observed maps, memorized paths, and practiced skills that would aid her journey home. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and she carried herself with a poise and assurance that had been absent before. Though she remained outwardly polite and obedient to her captors, her inner world was now a place of strategy, reflection, and hope. She was no longer merely a victim of circumstance. She was a young girl forging her destiny, equipped with the tools, knowledge, and determination to reclaim her life. The seeds of transformation had blossomed fully, and the girl stood ready, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, for the journey that would bring her back to the village and to the confrontation that awaited her. The girl's return journey began with careful preparation, undertaken in silence and with measured determination. She knew that returning to her village would not be a simple walk home. It required strategy, courage, and patience. Days before setting out, she reviewed everything she had learned during her time away. She examined the hidden treasures, scrolls, and secrets she had discovered, considering how each piece of knowledge could serve her in exposing the truth. She memorized routes through forests, hills, and streams, noting landmarks and natural signs that would guide her steps. Every detail mattered, from the position of the sun to the shape of tree trunks, and she rehearsed her movements in her mind, preparing for obstacles that could appear unexpectedly. The girl also sought allies, subtly reaching out to those who had aided her before. The elderly herbalist, a kindly woman with sharp intuition, provided guidance on navigating treacherous terrain and offered words of encouragement that bolstered the girl's confidence. A young boy, nimble and daring, showed her shortcuts through the forest and shared knowledge of hidden paths known only to locals. Even among the strangers who had held her, she identified a few who, though initially distant, had demonstrated kindness. Quietly, she learned how to appeal to their better natures without revealing the full scope of her plan, ensuring she would have support if needed. By the time she was ready to leave, the girl's preparation was meticulous, blending intelligence, observation, and intuition into a plan that would carry her safely back to her village. The journey itself tested her resolve in ways both expected and unforeseen. The first challenge arose with the terrain. Dense forests stretched across the horizon, their twisted branches forming obstacles that required careful navigation. Roots snaked across the paths, threatening to trip her at every step, while low-hanging branches scratched and clawed at her arms and face. Streams that had appeared shallow and benign during her earlier travels now roared with spring runoff, demanding careful balance and courage to cross. Each obstacle required focus, patience, and the practical skills she had developed during her time away. The girl faced them with determination, understanding that hesitation could cost her dearly. Beyond the natural obstacles, human challenges emerged as well. Travelers along the path eyed her suspiciously, questioning her presence and intentions. Some doubted her story, demanding explanations that she had to craft carefully to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. In these moments, she relied on her wits, speaking with clarity and confidence while concealing the full truth of her experiences. Occasionally, strangers attempted to deceive or intimidate her, but she was now prepared to stand firm, using both her knowledge and strategic thinking to navigate these encounters. Each challenge strengthened her resolve, confirming that she had grown from the frightened, obedient child who had been sold into a resourceful and resilient young girl. Throughout the journey, her emotional state was a complex blend of hope, fear, and anticipation. She thought constantly of her village, the people she had known, and the stepmother who had betrayed her. Memories of her childhood, both joyful and painful, surfaced, fueling her determination. She imagined the moment she would return, the surprise and awe in the villagers' eyes, and the confrontation with her stepmother that would finally set the record straight. These thoughts became a driving force, propelling her forward with a quiet urgency. Each step, though physically taxing, carried the weight of purpose and the promise of justice. The girl also reflected on the person she had become. She was no longer the helpless child who had trusted blindly. She had grown into someone capable of planning, surviving, and facing adversity with courage. She allowed herself moments of pride and self-recognition, acknowledging that her journey had forged strength from suffering. In these quiet reflections, she also nurtured hope that her return would not only correct past wrongs but also inspire respect, understanding, and reconciliation within the village. The anticipation of confronting her stepmother, exposing her secrets, and reclaiming her place in the community became a central focus of her thoughts, a beacon guiding her through the hardships of the journey. Finally, after days of travel, the outline of familiar hills and the first signs of her village appeared on the horizon. Her heart raced, a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation. Every skill, every lesson, and every secret she had gathered now had a purpose. She understood that the journey was not over. The path ahead demanded courage and wisdom as she prepared to face the stepmother and reveal the truths that had been hidden for so long. But with each step closer to home, she felt the power of her growth, her readiness for justice, and the hope that she would finally reclaim her life and honor. The moment the girl stepped into the village, it was as if the air itself shifted. The paths she had known so well were now tinged with an unfamiliar tension, and familiar faces turned toward her in astonishment. She walked with a newfound confidence, her posture straight, her steps deliberate, and her eyes bright with purpose. The villagers whispered among themselves, noting the transformation that had occurred during her absence. The girl's once quiet demeanor had been replaced by an aura of calm authority, a presence that commanded attention without a single word. Her hair, long and glossy, shimmered in the sunlight as if reflecting the knowledge and power she had gained. Even the children paused in their play, sensing something remarkable about her return. As she moved through the village, she allowed herself to observe the subtle reactions of the people around her. Some eyes widened in disbelief, while others reflected admiration and respect. She could feel the unspoken questions forming in their minds. Is this the same girl who was sold away? How has she changed so much? What has happened to her? The answers she carried within her were both simple and profound, the culmination of hidden knowledge, courage, and resilience forged over months of hardship. She knew that the time had come to reveal the truths that had long been buried, truths that would shake the very foundation of the village and its understanding of her family. She began with the secrets she had uncovered about her stepmother. In a clear, steady voice, she recounted the misdeeds and manipulations that had long gone unnoticed. She described how her stepmother had exploited the villagers, deceived her own family, and manipulated others for personal gain. Every detail was precise, corroborated by the documents, observations, and evidence she had gathered during her time away. The villagers listened in stunned silence, their eyes widening at the revelations. Some murmured among themselves, confirming parts of the story they had suspected but never dared to speak aloud. Others were completely unaware of the depth of the betrayal, their shock deepening with each passing detail. Alongside the tales of deceit, she shared the knowledge and treasures she had discovered. She revealed hidden caches of wealth, long-lost artifacts, and mystical truths that hinted at powers beyond ordinary understanding. Her words painted a picture of a world far richer and more mysterious than the villagers had imagined, one that had been carefully concealed by her stepmother and those complicit in her schemes. Each revelation seemed to ripple through the crowd, creating a mixture of fear, awe, and reverence. The girl's aura of authority was magnified by the tangible evidence she presented, leaving no room for doubt about the truth of her words. The villagers' reactions were immediate and varied. Some were terrified, glancing nervously at the stepmother and realizing the gravity of her actions. Others were filled with admiration for the girl, marveling at her courage, intelligence, and the strength she had displayed in uncovering these truths. Disbelief hung in the air, as many could not reconcile the image of the timid, obedient child they had known with the powerful, confident young woman standing before them. Whispers spread like wildfire as people debated the implications of what they had heard, acknowledging that the girl had returned not just as a survivor, but as a force to be reckoned with. Amidst the crowd, the stepmother's reaction was one of panic and desperation. Her face turned pale, her eyes darting anxiously as she tried to gauge the villagers' reactions. She stammered, attempting feeble defenses and half-truths, but the girl's evidence left little room for argument. The weight of guilt pressed heavily on her, and every attempt to explain or deflect only deepened the villagers' suspicion and anger. She realized, perhaps too late, that her web of lies had unraveled, and the consequences of her ambition and cruelty were now unavoidable. Her stepsisters, who had once laughed at the girl's struggles, now looked on in fear and confusion, unsure where their loyalties should lie. The girl's demeanor never wavered. She spoke with clarity, confidence, and calm authority, allowing the villagers to absorb the full impact of her revelations. She did not raise her voice, nor did she shout accusations. Her presence, the weight of the truth she carried, and the undeniable evidence were enough to command attention. By the time she finished recounting the secrets, the village had been transformed. The stepmother's control, once seemingly unshakable, was broken. The villagers began to see the girl not as a victim but as a harbinger of justice and change. The shocking revelation marked a turning point, one that would forever alter the dynamics of the village and restore the girl's place as a respected and empowered member of her community. The day of confrontation arrived with an intensity that seemed to ripple through the village. The girl, now strong, confident, and armed with knowledge, stood at the center of the town square. The villagers gathered around her, their eyes wide with anticipation. Whispers filled the air as people speculated what would happen next. The stepmother, sensing the shift in power, approached cautiously, her face pale and her usual arrogance replaced by unease. For the first time, she appeared uncertain, aware that the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for years was now crumbling under the weight of truth. The girl's gaze met her stepmother's, calm yet firm, and in that silence, the villagers felt the tension of years of deceit finally coming to light. "You betrayed me," the girl began, her voice steady and resonant, carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You sold me to strangers, hoping I would disappear, thinking that my absence would protect your secrets and ambitions. But the truth has a way of revealing itself, and today your lies will no longer shield you." The stepmother's lips quivered as she attempted to respond, but the girl raised a hand, silencing her. Every villager felt the weight of the words, the courage of the girl, and the undeniable authority she now commanded. As the confrontation unfolded, the girl began to reveal the evidence she had gathered. Documents, scrolls, and accounts of past misdeeds were displayed for all to see. Each revelation struck like a hammer, exposing the extent of the stepmother's greed, manipulation, and cruelty. She tried to interject, spinning half-truths and excuses, but the clarity and precision of the girl's evidence left her stumbling. The villagers listened intently, their eyes darting between the accused and the accuser. The stepmother's excuses became weaker with every statement, her voice trembling as her authority eroded under the undeniable weight of proof. The crowd began to murmur loudly, voices rising in unison, calling for justice. People who had long suspected the stepmother of wrongdoing now had confirmation, and the atmosphere shifted from uncertainty to moral clarity. The girl's courage inspired them, reminding them that truth and righteousness must prevail over deceit and manipulation. Even those who had once been loyal to the stepmother found themselves questioning their allegiance, realizing that the girl's integrity and perseverance were undeniable. The tension in the village square reached its peak, and it was clear that the time for reckoning had come. The villagers, guided by a sense of fairness and justice, decided on the consequences for the stepmother. Some called for exile, insisting that someone who had caused such harm could no longer live among them. Others demanded restitution, that she repay the village and the girl for the years of suffering and deceit. In some accounts, there were whispers of supernatural retribution, acknowledging that the spiritual forces had long been on the girl's side, guiding and protecting her during her journey. Whatever the form, the punishment was both symbolic and practical, ensuring that the stepmother could no longer wield her power to harm others. Throughout the process, the girl remained composed, observing how justice was administered. Her eyes reflected neither vengeance nor malice, but a deep understanding that the truth itself had power. She recognized that her journey, filled with hardship, learning, and growth, had prepared her not only to confront her stepmother but also to uphold a higher moral principle. In that moment, she became more than a victim. She became a symbol of righteousness, resilience, and the triumph of integrity over deception. The stepmother's reaction was a mixture of guilt, fear, and desperation. She realized that no excuse or manipulation could undo the consequences of her actions. The villagers' judgment, backed by evidence and moral clarity, left her powerless. The once dominant figure in the village now faced the consequences of a lifetime of deceit, while the girl, standing tall and resolute, had restored not only her own dignity but also the moral balance of the community. By the end of the day, the village had witnessed a profound transformation. The confrontation had served as a public acknowledgement that truth prevails, that justice, though delayed, can be achieved, and that courage and integrity can overcome even the most calculated deceit. The girl's bravery had inspired the villagers, reminding them that vigilance, compassion, and moral clarity are essential to the well-being of a community. The stepmother's fall was not merely a personal defeat, it was a moral lesson etched into the hearts of all who witnessed it, a reminder that deception and cruelty, no matter how well hidden, will eventually be exposed and corrected. The girl, having faced the ultimate betrayal and navigated the journey of hardship, knowledge, and growth, now stood as a beacon of hope and justice. Her return and the ensuing confrontation cemented her place in the village's memory, ensuring that the lessons of courage, resilience, and moral integrity would be passed down for generations. She had transformed suffering into wisdom, betrayal into strategy, and fear into empowerment, proving that the strength of character can triumph over deceit and cruelty. After the confrontation and the stepmother's downfall, the village slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The girl, once a figure of pity and victimhood, now walked among her neighbors with the respect and admiration she had long been denied. Her presence commanded quiet acknowledgement. People nodded to her as she passed, some with smiles, others with eyes reflecting awe. No longer the timid child overshadowed by cruelty, she carried herself with a calm dignity, the result of months of hardship, learning, and inner transformation. It was clear to everyone that she had not only survived her trials but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. The villagers, who had once been passive observers of her suffering, now sought her guidance and counsel. They recognized the depth of her experiences and the wisdom she had acquired through her journey. Elders who had doubted her innocence now spoke openly of her bravery, praising the clarity and integrity she had shown in confronting her stepmother. Children, inspired by her courage, followed her with curiosity, eager to hear her stories and learn from her insights. The girl, in turn, welcomed these gestures of trust and slowly began to weave herself back into the fabric of the community, reclaiming her rightful place as both a member and a guide. Her efforts to rebuild life were not limited to restoring her own position. She used her knowledge, experience, and the secrets she had uncovered to help others in practical and meaningful ways. She shared insights about medicinal herbs and hidden resources, teaching villagers how to improve their health and protect their crops. She offered guidance on navigating challenges with courage and patience, illustrating lessons she had learned during her own journey. Through these acts, she became a source of hope and resilience, demonstrating that hardship, when met with wisdom, could transform into strength not just for oneself, but for an entire community. In addition to her practical contributions, the girl also sought to repair relationships that had been strained by deception and misunderstanding. Families who had feared her stepmother's manipulations now looked to her for reassurance, and old tensions gradually gave way to reconciliation. She listened patiently to those who had been affected by the stepmother's schemes, offering compassion and understanding while guiding them toward clarity and resolution. Her ability to mediate disputes and foster trust made her an invaluable presence, reinforcing the moral that integrity and courage could heal wounds inflicted by greed and deceit. Even as the village returned to daily life, subtle signs of the mystical forces that had guided her journey became apparent. Crops flourished in previously barren fields, and streams that had been unreliable now flowed steadily, as if the natural world itself acknowledged her presence and purpose. Villagers spoke quietly of auspicious events that seemed linked to her return: the unexpected protection of animals, the survival of those who might otherwise have been harmed, and the discovery of hidden treasures that had long been forgotten. These occurrences reinforced the sense that her journey had been guided by unseen hands, and that her wisdom and courage had aligned with forces beyond ordinary understanding. The girl herself felt a profound sense of fulfillment and peace. She reflected on the long path she had traveled, from the betrayal of her stepmother to the trials of captivity, the uncovering of hidden knowledge, and the eventual confrontation that restored justice. Each stage had left its mark, shaping her into a young woman of resilience, insight, and quiet authority. She understood that her past suffering was not in vain. It had prepared her to navigate the complexities of life with both compassion and strength. Her journey had taught her the value of patience, the necessity of discernment, and the power of courage in the face of adversity. As the seasons changed, the girl's influence in the village grew steadily. She became a central figure in guiding young women and children, teaching them to recognize injustice, protect themselves, and cultivate inner strength. Elders sought her opinion on matters of importance, and even former skeptics acknowledged her wisdom and fairness. The village, once divided by fear and manipulation, began to thrive under this renewed sense of unity and moral clarity. People no longer whispered about fear or betrayal. Instead, they spoke openly about resilience, justice, and the importance of nurturing trust within their community. In quiet moments, the girl reflected on the mystical aspects of her journey, the signs, omens, and subtle guidance that had led her through danger and toward victory. She felt a deep gratitude, understanding that her life had been shaped not only by human action but also by forces beyond her understanding. These moments of reflection inspired hope for the future, a belief that the village, now guided by wisdom and justice, would continue to prosper. She sensed that her own path, while marked by trials, was intertwined with something greater, a destiny that promised both protection and opportunity as long as she remained true to the principles of integrity, courage, and compassion. By the end of this chapter in her life, the girl had successfully rebuilt not only her own existence but also the moral and social fabric of her village. Her return marked the triumph of truth over deceit, resilience over cruelty, and wisdom over ignorance. The villagers recognized her bravery, innocence, and insight, and she, in turn, committed herself to nurturing the community, guiding the young, and honoring the lessons of her extraordinary journey. Her life had been irrevocably transformed, and in that transformation lay the promise of a future both prosperous and protected. The story of the girl's journey, her betrayal, and eventual triumph spread quickly through the village, carried by whispers, conversations, and the excitement of witnessing truth prevail. Villagers recounted every detail to one another: the stepmother's deception, the girl's resilience, the secrets she had uncovered, and the eventual justice that restored balance to the community. It became more than a tale of one child; it was a living lesson, a cautionary narrative about the dangers of greed, cruelty, and betrayal. Parents told their children to heed the story, warning them of the consequences of dishonesty and malice. Elders emphasized the importance of integrity and compassion, ensuring that the memory of the events remained a moral guide for generations to come. The story highlighted multiple themes that resonated deeply with the villagers. Justice, as demonstrated by the girl's meticulous gathering of evidence and her composed confrontation with the stepmother, became a core lesson. Villagers saw that truth, though delayed, could not be suppressed indefinitely. The resilience of the girl, who endured hardship without surrendering her spirit, inspired others to face adversity with courage and patience. The power of secrets and knowledge was another key lesson. Hidden truths, once discovered, had the capacity to overturn injustice and shift the balance of power. The village understood that wisdom, courage, and careful observation could protect the innocent and hold wrongdoers accountable. As the narrative spread, villagers began reflecting on their own lives and behaviors. They reconsidered their approach to fairness, questioning past assumptions and biases that might have allowed deception to flourish. Leaders in the community committed to creating systems and traditions that promoted honesty, transparency, and collective responsibility. In conversations, they emphasized that cruelty, manipulation, and selfish ambition ultimately led to downfall, while compassion, patience, and insight ensured harmony and prosperity. The story became a reference point in discussions about conflict resolution, leadership, and moral responsibility. The girl herself became a symbol of hope and intelligence. Children looked up to her as an example of courage and perseverance, while adults admired her strategic thinking and wisdom. She represented the idea that suffering, when met with determination and insight, could be transformed into empowerment and leadership. Her journey reinforced the belief that even the most difficult circumstances could be navigated successfully, provided one remained steadfast and attentive to truth. The villagers internalized this symbolism, using her story as a framework for teaching values, guiding decisions, and nurturing a stronger sense of community cohesion. Moreover, the tale emphasized that justice and morality were not abstract concepts but practical principles that shaped everyday life. Villagers who had once been passive observers now became active participants in safeguarding their community. They vowed to protect the innocent, to speak out against cruelty, and to ensure that manipulation and greed would no longer find fertile ground. The story acted as a catalyst for cultural and social change, embedding the principles of fairness, accountability, and ethical behavior into the village's collective consciousness. Even as years passed, the girl's story was recounted during festivals, at gatherings, and in the quiet moments of family life. It served as a touchstone for reflection, reminding villagers of the consequences of deceit and the enduring power of integrity. Her tale reinforced the idea that knowledge, courage, and patience could alter the course of life, not only for the individual but for the entire community. By honoring her story, the village ensured that future generations would grow up with a clear understanding of right and wrong, guided by the lessons she embodied. Ultimately, the girl's journey and the village's response illustrated a profound truth. Justice is inevitable, resilience is transformative, and knowledge, especially when used wisely, is a powerful tool against oppression. The villagers learned that cruelty and greed may flourish temporarily, but they can never withstand the clarity of truth combined with courage. The story became a living moral compass, a narrative that shaped values, behavior, and expectations for years to come. Through her experience, the village understood that the choices of one individual, guided by integrity and determination, could inspire collective awakening and lasting change.